Hey, LH. So before I get started, I do want to ask if there's anything that you want to talk about, or if you want to, want me to take a look at for you here. Just type it in and I can pull it up. I was going to go over the warrant and just kind of talk through some of that and share some insights I have, and then I want to keep an eye on the chat and hear what you have to say about this. But again, feel free to throw something in there and let me know if there's anything you want to look at or talk about while I go through this. So the first thing I want to pull up really quick that I want to share with everybody is the old warrant. And the old warrant here was edited, of course, before it was released to the public, and they kind of cut out pieces and pieced together what they were going to let us know about. So there's a part in here where it talks about Dylan, and when she sees this person in the house and the bushy eyebrows, and then that person is walking out of the house and she's kind of in that frozen shock phase, and then it says that person goes towards the back door. She locked herself in her room, and then that leads investigators to believe that the murderer left the scene, right? So that was all they told us back then. But in the new warrant, in the Pennsylvania warrant, there's additional information there that I don't know why they released it in that warrant. Maybe they just didn't catch it and they didn't edit it out. But in the new warrant, it tells a little bit more about what Dylan told law enforcement. And that's kind of significant, because if she's telling them one thing more that wasn't released to us before, then of course she's probably telling them a lot more than that, right? And so that just kind of supports the idea that she has told law enforcement a lot more than we know about. I would imagine that they would have been asking a lot of follow-up questions of her, in addition to just, oh, he walked past you and you locked your door, right? They're going to be asking, what was he wearing? Did you see him carrying a knife? All of those details she would have shared. So this is the old one. Let's take a look at the new warrant here. And I'm going to show you where they released this additional sentence that supports that. Sorry, it should be right here. Here it is. Okay. So same thing as the other warrant, but at this part it says she's in the frozen shock phase. The male walks toward the back door. She locked herself in her room. And then there's this extra sentence here. Mortensen did not state that she recognized the male. So when you kind of look at those different theories out there about her being involved or knowing Brian, unless she's flat out lying about it, I'm sure law enforcement would have uncovered that in her phone records. They've done, a full forensic analysis of her phone records. So I doubt they would have missed a connection there between her and Brian. So she didn't recognize him, right? So this wasn't a person that was coming around the house regularly. At least she didn't recognize them. You would think if she recognized those eyebrows and the eyes that she might have connected that to somebody she knew. We don't know. But I do think it's interesting that they released this extra little bit, but that also supports that they asked her a lot more questions. She probably told them a lot more. What kind of shoes was he wearing? She may not have seen those things, but there were a lot of questions that they would have asked her. I'll bet you she gave them a composite drawing somewhat, right? They do it differently nowadays, but most likely they were asking her all kinds of questions and developing this profile from what she was telling them. And then a lot of what they did when they were looking for the suspect was based off of this eyewitness account and the things that she had told them. Her description of them, not just the eyebrows and that, but his height and his build and things like that. We only saw this little bit here that they're releasing in this document, but there was a conversation, right, that happened between Dylan and these officers. And so it wasn't just her talking like a robot. and saying, I saw a figure who was 5'10", male, not very muscular, right? There was a conversation happening, and she was giving them much more detail. This is just a summary of that information that they have and what they want to tell us, right? Just the minimum that they want to tell us. Yep. Yeah, I agree. Colleen. I think it was a lot louder than everybody thinks. There's a lot of questions about, why wasn't there any screams? Why didn't we hear anything? I think they did. I think Dylan heard a lot more than we are being told. I think she was probably more aware than it sounds based off of what was released in the warrant. She's describing hearing the dog. They're just kind of giving us the timeline in these documents on how it unfolded, not all of the details. She may have told law enforcement, yeah, I heard a full-on fight happening in the living room, and they're screaming and a brawl happening, and I could hear exactly what was happening. And I peered out the door, and I was scared, and we don't know. But I do think she heard a lot more. I don't know about Bethany for sure. She was all the way downstairs. It's hard to say. They've been really quiet about her. But Dylan being right around the corner, right below, I do think she heard something. And so I think that when people say, well, why wasn't there a scream? Why wasn't there noise? I think that there was. I'm wondering where Ethan was found too. If he was the first one to encounter Brian, or if it was Xana. It's kind of gone back and forth from what's been released. I could see it unfolding either way, but not quite sure where each person was. I don't know if Xana was attacked and then kind of maybe ran back to that room, and then Ethan encountered him, kind of being woken up, or if it was the other way around, where maybe Xana said, hey, there's somebody out there, and Ethan went to investigate, and and then he was attacked first. They haven't given us really the answer to that in what they've released. So I thought that was interesting, right? They've got that extra sentence there, and I do think it supports that they know a lot more, and they know a lot more about what happened that night and what the witness saw. So okay, so this is what was taken off of Brian, most likely, when they took him into custody. It looks like he was probably wearing a set of casual clothing, right, hanging out at home, maybe even sleeping, because I think they might have raided, in the middle of the night, so he might have been in bed. I don't think anything here is too unusual. It's just his clothes. They took some swabs for DNA from him. One Defiant silver flashlight. I don't know. It could have been a nightstand, and he could have had it in his hand when they walked up to him and put the handcuffs on him, and that's in his possession, right? So he might have had a flashlight by the bed, and when he heard the police busting in, grabbed the flashlight and had it in his hand. It could have been a smaller flashlight in his pocket. When I see the Under Armour shorts, those aren't real heavy duty, so a heavy flashlight carrying, it would, if it was like a pocket flashlight, I could see that, or it could be a bedside. Now I have heard some discussion about it possibly being like a UV flashlight that he could have been using to see stains to clean up, and I think that could make sense. Defiant does make a silver flashlight that's a pocket flashlight that has a UV function. It doesn't necessarily capture blood. Blood takes a little bit of a different, you need that luminol and the UV to see the blood. But it would be helpful if he was just cleaning up in general and looking for stains in his vehicle and on his clothes, things like that. He possibly. It could also just be a bedside flashlight. So nothing too crazy here around what was, I think, taken off of his person. It does get a lot more interesting, though, when we get into what was taken out of the house. But before we do that, let's take a look at what they took out of the vehicle, out of the white Elantra. And this isn't everything. This is just most likely this isn't all that they found. They're going to find more. We don't know DNA-wise what they're going to pull out of it. But so this is the warrant here that lists what was taken from the vehicle. See, the other one was his person, and now here's the car. So swabs, I think that this is going to be the swabs that they took off of the vehicle looking for stuff. Maybe off the handle, different areas of the vehicle. They probably took some swabs. A couple of Ziploc bags, a bunch of change in there. A couple, we don't know if the change was maybe in the bags, but not unusual for people to have change in their car. Gloves. We don't know what kind of gloves. It could be work gloves for if your car breaks down. That's not unusual. Probably various receipts. I don't know if Brian would just leave anything incriminating in his car for this long receipt-wise. So it's probably just generic receipts, car insurance, registration, some hiking boots. Not too unusual. I have heard that Brian likes to hike, so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for him to have some hiking boots in the vehicle. A Comfort Inn room key holder, evidence of a stay. That could have been the trip from Washington to Pennsylvania. He and his dad might have stayed a night in a Comfort Inn, to sleep. It would depend on the significance there, on what the date was. If it was very close to the murders or something like that, and he maybe went there to clean up, possible. But I don't think he would still have that in his vehicle at this point, a month later. So most likely that's from the drive from Washington to Pennsylvania, if I had to bet. Tire iron, not unusual. Shovel, not unusual, depending on the type. If it's, a bury a dead body type shovel, that's a little bit weird. But if it's just a small shovel for your vehicle and for digging out of the snow, for example, that's not unusual, especially if you live in that type of climate. Goggles, probably safety goggles. We don't know for sure. I think if they were fancy night vision goggles or something like that, it would say night vision goggles. So I'm assuming these are safety goggles that he has, kind of like an emergency kit in the car. Took the floor mats, reflective vest, again goes to that safety kit. Some used water bottles, a wrench, door panels, seats, seat cushions, headrest, seat belt, visor. Fiber, we don't know what kind of fiber. Could be unidentified, something that was in the vehicle stuck to something that they got some sort of fiber there. Took the brake pedal and gas pedal, so that might be key, because the brake and gas pedal are going to be more porous, right? It's a different type of, it's not just metal, and so even if you were to wipe that, it's possible it could hold on to some. I don't know how sensitive the DNA extraction is, but it is possible that they could potentially get something out of like a groove there off of that brake pedal or gas pedal. It's kind of that almost a rubbery, hard rubber kind of material, so it might absorb a little bit more. I don't know. I just think that that might be a good spot, especially if he had blood right on the bottom of his shoes. They might know that based off of footprints, and so they might be thinking the same thing and going, oh, hey, let's check those pedals because we know he had blood on his feet. So phone charger, a Band-Aid, wrappers, kind of typical stuff in people's cars, maps, documents, and a seatbelt boot. So nothing jumps out here really, but I do think the point of the vehicle is to look for DNA and a mistake. Something was on him, rubbed it somewhere, and there's enough there that they're going to find it, hopefully. But they're probably going to tear that vehicle apart. They're already taking it apart at this point. You can see they're taking panels off right off the bat, so they're piecing it out, and they're going to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So the house is where it gets a lot more interesting, though, for us. There's a lot of stuff that they took out of the house, and it really already sent me down this rabbit hole. I'm going to share that with everybody tonight, and then my next video that I post is going to delve into this as well, but you'll get to kind of hear my thoughts on this in advance, and I definitely want to hear your feedback on it, because sometimes I get into the weeds in this, and I just got to make sure I'm not crazy here. So it's always good to hear your thoughts and keep me in line if I go too far off track. And you'll see what I mean here a little bit later on. There's some interesting connections on what they found in the house that tie into my past videos when it comes to Brian's motive and some of the things I talked about with social Darwinism. There's yet another connection here from this Pennsylvania warrant. So I'm pretty excited to share that with everybody, but I do want to hear what your thoughts are. All right, so this will be the warrant that covered the house and the things that were taken out of the house. Let's going to be a few pages long here. So you can see here we've got about 3 pages of items, 4 pages listed. And it's Friday night, everybody. If I pause for a minute, I'm just taking a drink there, and I just don't want you to hear me. So I'm just kind of muting myself there for a moment. So hang in there. Okay, so this is, I mean, right off the bat, it's intriguing, right? So the number one item listed here is a knife. And the interesting thing here is there's no name brand. Later on in this warrant, it talks about, right here, you can see a Smith & Wesson pocket knife. And then later on, they talk about another knife, a Taylor cutlery knife. And they specifically describe what kind of knife it is, where in this case, it's just straight up knife, So I don't know. Does that mean it's the knife? Is that, guys, we got it, knife. Why doesn't this one say Smith & Wesson knife or Taylor cutlery knife or SOG knife, whatever the brand is? Why does it just say knife? So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Maybe it was just a generic knife and it had no markings on it and they didn't know, right? So they just put knife, but very unique that they would put that, right? That they wouldn't say anything there. A book with underlining on page 118. I have a theory on what book, or what type of book anyway. I haven't quite narrowed it down to the specific book. I'm actually tempted to go buy some books that I suspect could be the book that they're talking about here and check page 118, because when you try to find it online, it doesn't necessarily come up right. But I think it might have something to do with psychology. There were some other psychology books taken, and when I tell you something else here coming up, you'll see what I mean. But it's really interesting here that they're talking about an underlining on page 118. Like they flip through the book to page 118. Why? And I really think that they might be on to Brian a lot more than we think regarding his motive, and I think there's got to be, they might have some sort of information there on him, and they're looking for specific things. But I don't know, a book with underlining on page 118, like a 118 page book, and you're rating the house. I mean, are they flipping page by page? And then they see this underline. So what did he underline, right? And I'm wondering, did he underline a quote, a saying, or something like that he might have been impacted by? We have this AT&T. I'll let everybody know if I get anywhere on that, and keep you posted on what book I can figure out there. I have some ideas. I'll show you that in a minute. But so an AT&T bill for Brian, just his phone bill. So the Glock 22 is it's a 40 caliber handgun. If you're not familiar with firearms, the Gen 5 just means it's the 5th generation of this particular gun. So every so often they'll change a little bit of the design. But the Gen 5, for example, the Gen 4 might have little bumps where your fingers are around the grip, and then the Gen 5 would be smooth, right? So they would just change the design slightly. So that's what Gen 5 means. This particular gun was released in 2020. So it had to have been purchased either 2020 or later. So a Gen 5 Glock, a pretty common gun, especially law enforcement. That's a very common police officer firearm. But it could be, it doesn't necessarily mean it's Brian's. This could be his dad's gun. This came from the house. You can see, it's even his dad who signed. So it could be his dad's firearm. We're not sure. So there's the Smith & Wesson pocket knife. Again, noted there with the brand. Folder with his vehicle paperwork, a laptop. There were multiple computers taken from the home, laptops, desktop computers as well. So this was interesting, a green leafy substance in a green container. And then we have down here a green leafy substance in a plastic bag. So Pennsylvania is a medical marijuana state, but it's not recreational. So most likely he purchased the marijuana, and I'm pretty sure we all know what it is. Most likely he purchased it in Washington at one of the dispensaries there, because it is legal there, recreational. So especially when you see here in a green container, it's probably one of those plastic containers, you know, that kind of looks like a prescription bottle. That kind of signifies it was purchased at a dispensary. The plastic bag could also be, a lot of products are plastic packaged that way. But I thought that was interesting because I do have another video where I mentioned the possibility that he could have crossed paths with the victims at some point at a dispensary, because I saw some signs where Kaylee had been following one, not necessarily one in Pullman, but she was following one, and it would make sense if she lived in Idaho that she would shoot across the state line there into Washington and probably could go to a dispensary there. And then if Brian was there, it very well could have been somewhere that he crossed paths with them at some point. That was just kind of a theory I had there when I was looking for ways that they could have interacted in Pullman or in Moscow at some point, and I found a connection there. Kaylee had some issues with anxiety and things, and then she was following that, so she may have, you know, been shopping there for that. And then, you know, Brian, I also believe has dealt with some anxiety things, and he could also have been using that to deal with that as well. So we have documents, we have white paper with a password, power cable, cell phone, some empty magazines for the firearm that they found, various books, some black face masks. It could be medical, like, you know, just the kind that people wear in public, you know, black face masks. His family, when they came to court, remember, they were all wearing black face masks, and maybe that was just something they had, and you know, that could have been what those were. A prescription is what I believe item 17 is here. Yeah, that was just a thought I had, LH, that, you know, because those places typically will have a lobby, and, you know, you could be sitting in the lobby and somebody else comes in. Just, you know, again, there were some connections there, but we don't know for sure. Some black gloves, a black hat, and a black mask. A lot of dark clothing. So I would assume that they're going to take all of Brian's clothing. You know, anything that they know is his, they're going to take it. But I noticed a theme here as we go through this. You'll see that it's all dark clothing. It's like dark pants, dark this, you know, dark green, black. And kind of backing up to what we were talking about with Dylan and her probably telling people a lot more than what we know. Did she give a description that he was in dark clothing? But how much of a description, you know, did she give? Was it a hoodie? We don't quite know. So, you know, I don't know. It seems like they're looking for a theme here of dark colored clothing, but maybe that's just Brian's style. You know, that might just be what he had. But it's like all this stuff's like black and dark color, you'll see. Personal ID. So here we get into a bunch of clothes here. So we have some Nike shoes, or not Nike, I'm sorry, they're New Balance shoes, dark colored jackets, dark jacket, dark color jacket. You see just grabbing all these jackets, shirts, dark colored shirts, dark colored pants. It's all noted as being dark colored. A clear plastic glove. So I'm thinking that's one of those latex type gloves that they have. Here's another laptop, and it looks like it has a dummy. I think that says dummy. It might be like a dummy drive, hard drive they're referring to. Oh no, you know what? I'm sorry, that doesn't say dummy. It's damage. That's right. So this one was one Asus laptop with damage, and then one HP laptop with damage. When I first read through this, I was thinking it said dummy, and I was thinking it was a dummy hard drive, but then I realized it's damage. So that was interesting. You know, a couple of broken or damaged laptops. Here they have the record of the sale of the gun. That's interesting that they have that on hand, or you know they got it that quick. So it could have been a recent purchase. I don't know. It could have been older, but they could probably trace the purchase of that without this receipt. But they did find the receipt. So this was item 29 here. It says item photographed but not taken. So I don't know if that's in reference to item 28, and because it's a receipt, Maybe they didn't take it because it proves their ownership, and so maybe they took a photo of it. I'm not quite sure. Maybe it belonged to Brian's dad, and so I'm not quite sure what they would have photographed. But I wonder if it's related to item 28. There's a note in a desk: criminal psychology book, documents, and DeSales University notebook. Okay, so down here we have another Navy fleece. So this is, in my opinion, the most interesting thing that they got here. This item 34. It's a man's mind drawing, and this is kind of what sent me down a rabbit hole a little bit. I'll show you what I mean here, but a man's mind drawing is what that's talking about. So this was also a weird one. Let me know what you think about this in the chat. This one here, item 35, ID cards inside glove, inside box. So when's the last time you took your ID cards and put them inside a glove and then put them in a box somewhere? It's a little unusual. Whose ID cards were they? What do you guys think about that one? The ID cards inside glove, inside box. So item 36, we have various criminology books, notes, license, and card. That would go with the theme of that other book we were talking about, maybe being around criminology or psychology. Dark colored hat, black gloves. Looks like we have a solid state drive here, a Samsung. So they're grabbing any computer evidence, any technology, digital evidence they can get. Now, this is something that I do think is going to be really key in the trial and the overall evidence they have. I do think they have a ton of digital evidence on Brian. And it reminds me of a case like about 20 years ago that it wasn't necessarily a digital thing, but it wasn't the same type of crime, but it was kind of a groundbreaking crime because it was the Danielle Van Dam case. And what happened was this little girl had been murdered and her body was left out in the desert. Well, when they found her, there was the defense was trying to kind of break up the timeline, and say it couldn't have been the person who did it because of, how long she'd been out there. Well, it was groundbreaking because they had actually taken the fly larva and the life cycle of the flies to determine how long she had been there. And they were able to prove that she had been there longer than what the defense was saying. So the defense was kind of saying, hey, she could have only been there for a week because, the flies had only evolved this way. Well, the prosecution found out that they had already gone through a whole cycle, right, and evolved again and kind of had another generation. And so they were able to prove that. And it was a big deal because they were explaining it to the jury in court. And it was kind of the first time that people were hearing about this kind of science and being applied toward determining it. And so that was all these experts in court kind of battling against each other, trying to prove the case. So fast forward, 20 years later to this case, I think this is going to be a groundbreaking case in a different way in this digital aspect. And I think it's going to come down to a lot of experts battling it out in court about this digital evidence and these kind of digital footprints that Brian's left, whether it's tracking, following the girls on Instagram or other things where he could have been tracking. I think Brian has a lot of knowledge about how to do those things online. Remember, he applied for a cloud forensic job, so he's very familiar with digital evidence and information online and how to access it and get rid of it. So I think this digital evidence here in this case, all of these computers. Now, these computers from the house, he may not have used these ones here. They did get the computer from his house, but I really wonder what are they going to get from those, because he is so knowledgeable on how to cover his tracks. And what did he do to try to cover that information up? Yeah, LH, a man's mind, it does tie into that, but you'll see it's kind of in a unique way, but it does lead us right to what you're saying there about a narcissistic personality. So a lot of computer stuff. We have 2 pair of black gloves. We have a black knit hat. Dark green clothing. Again, more dark clothing listed here. Black pants, black jeans. Right? I think they're grabbing any clothing that maybe is Brian's. This stuff could have even been old clothes of Brian's when he was younger and he lived with his parents that were still there in a closet, right? Who knows what these clothes are. And then if we talk about Brian potentially being connected to past cases, who knows, right? But they're probably grabbing everything clothes-wise. More dark clothing, gray jacket, black gloves. Another motherboard here. We have WSU paperwork. This was interesting. A note from Brian from Montana. So, we've also talked about the idea that Brian has visited other states, right? A lot of these other victims that we've kind of compared to this crime, and the idea that Brian could have been the perpetrator. And, it's kind of like, well, why would he be in these other states? What would he be doing there? Why would he be in Oregon or Georgia or whatever? Well, here we have a note from Brian from Montana. So what was he doing in Montana, right? He obviously goes to other states. If this is a note from Brian from Montana, I wonder what was he doing in Montana. Craftsman shop vac. They're definitely going to take any vacuum that could have been potentially used to clean up. Medical documents. And it looks like court documents here, item 49. And then we have a note to dad from Brian. So again, is it just a, hey, I'm going to the grocery store, I'll be right back note? Or is there a significance here? Is this a note that has more meaning? Could this be a confession note? Or is it just a simple, I'll be back later note? We don't know. But a note to dad from Brian. It's strange how it's worded to just note to dad from Brian. The way the person who gathered the evidence here, is just real casual. I say Brian all the time in my videos. I can't help myself just because it just comes out. But I can see that they're doing the same. Maybe they're watching my videos. Maroon colored spiral notebook. Dark colored clothes. An all-in-one computer. Another idea pad, laptop, tangent model, medallion, desktop. So they're grabbing all the computers. Dark clothes in a laundry bag or a laundry basket. So here's the other knife we were talking about, the Taylor cutlery knife with leather sheath. So that's going to be a fixed blade knife. Taylor cutlery makes all kinds of knives. The fact that it's in a leather sheath is probably going to be a fixed blade knife, but again, we talked about that first item just says knife, but we have two more knives that they collected, and both of those knives were noted, but that other one wasn't. 4 swabs here. I don't know what they swabbed, but they did take some swabs. And then we have some more dark colored boots and some brown boots. Yeah, Colleen, good point. So, and it's perfect timing here because this is kind of when we circle back now to this drawing, A Man's Mind. It makes me really think that they know a lot more about Brian than we realize. So let's check this out. So, where is it at? Right here, A Man's Mind drawing. Okay. So this would be the drawing here that I believe is the drawing that they would have taken. So it's actually they wrote a man's mind drawing, but I believe it's what's on a man's mind. So this is kind of comes from some of Sigmund Freud's theories, but you can see here, it's a man's head with this woman's nude body, kind of making up the facial features of him. So interesting, enough, that they were probably taking anything that was in his possessions. But the thing that caught my attention here was the connection here to Sigmund Freud, because in my past video, when you talk about Darwinism and social Darwinism, Sigmund Freud was a huge fan of Darwin, and a lot of his theories are based off of Darwin's theories. So Freud actually, it took him 8 years to finish his degree because he spent 3 years kind of going off to the side just to study Darwinism. He was so obsessed with it. And so it slowed him down from even accomplishing his other pursuits. And then he actually changed from being a physician. He was going to school to be a physician, and he changed his focus because of Darwin and kind of got into this kind of psychological study. So what's on a man's mind, I'm pretty sure, is going to be this drawing. Now, the interesting thing, though, is when we start looking at Freud, let me show you here. Let me find it. Sorry, guys. Well, I can just kind of walk through it. But so the interesting thing is with what Freud believes is he talks about there being what's called three aspects to your personality. So you have what's called your ID, and that's kind of what you're born with, right? That's kind of these internal urges that everybody has ingrained in them that drives them to just kind of take care of themselves, right? It's just kind of whatever's pleasurable, whatever you need to kind of make yourself feel good. That's what that drive is for. And then you have kind of the extreme on the other side, which is called your superego. And that's kind of what keeps you on track with following the rules and doing the right thing. And all of these kind of parts of all of these things are kind of developed when you're really young, according to Freud. But you have your superego, which is kind of pushing you to do the right thing. And it's almost too far to the extreme, though, right? It's like you have to be a perfectionist, perfect at what you're doing. And then the other one is just do what's easy and do what you want. And then in the middle is your ego, right? So let me find this really quick for you, because I know about that, everyone. So here we go. So we have the ego, the superego, and the ID. It might be a little small there. So your ID is composed of biological, your instincts, right? You're kind of born with it. It basically, seeks immediate gratification. It's kind of obeys this pleasure principle, according to Freud. So it's like pleasure's good, nothing else matters. Gratifying urges returns your body to homeostasis. It's driven by libido. It's kind of a biological force. And then this is a really crazy part here, this last part, and I'll show you in a minute, this Thanatos. So that's a Greek god, but he's referring to what he calls the death instinct. So your superego here is learned. You develop it when you're really young, but it's essentially your drive to just do the right thing. But it's a little bit dysfunctional because it's like driven around perfection, right? So then you have your ego in the middle, which is kind of what keeps the balance there. So this is your rational, reality-oriented system. It kind of holds your ID in check, right? Those urges. It keeps your ID in check, and it will prevent your urges from getting too out of line based off of your superego principles, right? So this is kind of where you find that balance of what, when you're, what are you going to allow yourself to give it into? So the reason I think this is really interesting, when we talk about Brian, is we know he was doing that survey and reaching out and trying to understand kind of that criminal mind and why people commit crimes and how they feel. And then there were some posts that were uncovered about Brian kind of trying to understand himself, right? And some of the things that he was going with or dealing with. And so I think that he was really, I think he had some internal struggles going on and some urges for quite a while that he was trying to understand. And I think as he got into psychology and he started learning about some of these theories, it could have appealed to him, right? Because it's, in a sense, it's kind of if you really delve deeply into Freud and Darwinism, it's a lot of it is giving into some of these urges, these kind of primal urges, and it almost, kind of makes an excuse, to do it, just saying, well, it's just natural, right? It's part of being human. And so, he kind of describes this, but So, if Brian were obsessed with, committing these crimes and experiencing that and kind of suppressing these urges, but over time, he's not able to suppress it anymore. And when you talk about suppressing the urges, it could be even something like watching a video, or the stalking, the watching of the victims in person is a way to appease that urge, right? It satisfies that urge to an extent, but over time, that doesn't satisfy that urge as much, and so you could escalate to further on, and then things happening in your life like what happened to Brian, where he lost his job, he didn't get the job at, with law enforcement, who knows what else was going on, but it sounded like things were kind of spiraling for Brian, and then he's fighting these urges, and he's there's another thing with Freud where he talks about kind of this dream. He evaluates people's dreams and things, and the way, and when you talk about dreams, not just sleeping, but even when you're awake, but your daydreams and your fantasies, essentially, right? And so Brian is processing all of these things in his mind and internally, and suppressing it and gratifying these urges in different ways. He might be watching, videos, he might be stalking them, and so it's appeasing him. But then when your life kind of spirals out, we talked about in another video of mine as well, ego depletion, and you kind of just break down, and that's his ego, right? When I mentioned ego depletion in that video, your ego is what keeps things in balance. And when you're getting broken down, that thing that keeps you in balance, that thing that keeps your ID in check fails you, and then you give into that urge. And that's really common with serial killers, because exactly, Colleen, him justifying it. And it's really common with serial killers because that kind of urge builds and builds. And what they want is, because as that urge builds, it's an anxiety to them, and they want relief from that anxiety. And so by committing the crime, it gives them that temporary release, but then it comes back, right? But they and that's why a lot of serial killers will keep a trophy, and they'll take something because they want to relive that expression, and they want to have that calm again and that feeling of relief. It reminds them of that moment. And then that ties in a little bit too with this death drive that I was mentioning earlier with this Thanatos. So the death drive, essentially, let me see if I can find that really quick. Drive, sorry. See if it's here. All right, let me see if I can find something here. Here's one. So essentially, the death instinct or the death drive. So Freud believes that humans have basically two drives. You have the life instinct or the life drive, and then the death. And the life drive is kind of what pushes you to procreate. It pushes you to achieve that pleasure and satisfaction. So it's kind of like, all of the things that you want to just give into that make you feel good, that's what you live for, essentially, right? That's your life drive, and the desire to procreate and all of those things. Well, you also have what he calls the death drive or the death instinct. And the idea here is that humans also have this urge unconsciously to die. And so when you talk about something like a skydiver, and they kind of get that thrill of that, risk of, jumping out of a plane, and that's kind of, is where that would stem from, is that death drive that we have ingrained in us. That's why it's thrilling, right? Unconsciously, it's thrilling to you. And so deep down inside, Freud theorizes that everybody has this kind of inner desire to die. And so the thing, though, that keeps us from doing that is your life drive and your pursuit of all those pleasurable things in life. And that's kind of why you don't give in to the death instinct. Now, the death instinct can be expressed externally or internally. So it's more common for it to be expressed externally. And what that means is literally committing violence on other people. So when, when you have this kind of imbalance, you could express it in that way. Now, the internal version would be people who self-harm or commit suicide, right? So according to Freud, there is this drive within all people that they want to die. So what that kind of brings me to, and I spent a lot of time kind of just reading about Freud and stuff. I showed you, some of the documents there that I was reading through, and it just, you can't cover it in a video, all of this stuff. It really kind of takes you down a lot of different things. But essentially, I thought it was a strange connection here that we had, these other connections from before that we found around social Darwinism and these really extreme ideologies and kind of these views on society. And then here later on, they release these warrants, and in the warrant, there's another really, what I think is a really clear connection to that again. And that makes me wonder, do they know more about Brian and his motive and what's going on in Brian's head? They're professional profilers. Could they be onto him, with some of this and understand more about why he was committing these crimes? And they have access to way more evidence, right, than we do to really uncover this stuff. And then there's another thing here about Freud that I wanted to share with you that again aligns with this same. There's a quote that he has. But essentially what I'm not quite sure where the quote is, but essentially he has this view that like beautiful women are narcissistic essentially, and they only care about themselves, and they basically, will only look for like another person who admires them the same way that they admire themselves as well. So they're kind of these narcissistic beings, these beautiful women. And again, it just really made me think about Brian and, could he have viewed the victims in that way? He sees, because, Kaylee and Maddie had a lot of posts online. They had a lot of followers. They were very beautiful, right? And so Brian could have been looking at them after studying all of this stuff with Freud and, being pulled into this maybe because of all these internal struggles that he's having. And then, a lot of this stuff too it's pulled from Greek. When you talk Thanatos and stuff, it's the Greek, and here is Greek row, and there's these pretty girls, posting, and he's seeing it, and he has these extreme beliefs and ideologies, and he develops this kind of hatred and resentment towards them. I wonder if that could be, a big part of what was driving Brian to commit these crimes, because you can manifest a lot of different internal struggles and express it that way, with the way he committed these crimes. So yeah, the warrant is very interesting, and I do think that this connection here to Freud is very interesting, and I wonder again if maybe law enforcement is interested in that picture. Again, the book, right? That's page 118 underlined. What book is that? I wonder if it could even be a Freud book. There are a good amount of books that Freud has written, and really really interesting stuff here. The interpretation of dreams, and so this is what I was mentioning, where he talks about just kind of the study of what dreams mean and on the mind and stuff. But there's some interesting quotes there. And this is kind of talks about like the different pleasure principles, right? What drives people's to do things. But the Thanatos one, so this is where with, how we heard Brian had said, it's okay, I'm going to help you. So that, my thought on that would be the Thanatos idea here. So Thanatos, if you read into him, it's basically, he's a Greek god of death, and having this death drive would mean that, you have this kind of, the aim of all life is death, is what Freud had declared. And people channel that death drive, like I mentioned earlier, as an aggression toward others. And you can also, direct that internally. And then he talks about having just this unconscious desire to die, but life instincts overcome that, right? They're stronger. So I wonder, when I read about all this stuff and this kind of connection here to that, and I'm going to help you, could Brian have actually been trying to personify Thanatos, right? And when he says, it's okay, I'm going to help you, right? He's actually helping them die, helping them accomplish, what they really want, that unconscious goal to actually die. The aim of all life is death. And, could he have had this kind of twisted view on all of these things that he's been studying? And in that moment, he's thinking to himself, oh, I'm going to help you. Like he's, essentially he believes that that's what they really want. So I think we're coming up on an hour here.